Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Pod and the Pendulum, the horror movie podcast that covers all of the franchises, one movie and one episode at a time. I'm your host, Mike Snoonian, and I have one of our lovely regular co hosts in the big chair with us today from the Disenfranchised podcast, Mr. Chewy Walrus, Stephen Foxworthy. Stephen, how are we?
Doing very well, Mike. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. It's been a week. It's been a hell of a week of work. And
Boy,
everything
has
else.
it.
So,
Yeah.
like, the school year has already felt like a year, and it's just not even at Thanksgiving, but that's all right.
I mean, this past week felt like a year, really.
It did. It really did. But we're not alone. We've got someone with us traveling through hyperspace. I guess hyperspace as it is right now as we cover our movie today. Like, it's a first-time guest. She is the co-host of the Buffy podcast, Fangs for the Memories, as well as the cannibal and body horror podcast, Tender Subjects. Miss Katy Terry. Kate, how are we? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm, also, muddling through the week.
Yeah, online provocateur, I would say.
Yeah.
As well. So
it is true. I tend to get myself in a lot of trouble by saying things that I think are extremely normal.
Yes.
And other people freak out about.
Yeah. But that's okay. That is totally fine. I think what you say is typically pretty normal, and people just it's the online world. People tend to freak out. But welcome. We're super excited to have you on.
Thank you.
Alien Romulus. It's like the fourth current movie we're covering on the big show this year, which is different for us. It's definitely an unusual thing, but we are here to kind of put a bow on the Alien franchise for right now and get all caught up until they make another one. And I say, like, Kate, as our guest, if you want to give like your just initial thoughts on Romulus and maybe the Alien franchise as a whole, like, where this fits in for you and where Alien as a series kind of is for you.
Yeah. So I think like pretty much everyone, the original Alien is my favorite movie. It is a masterpiece. It's beautiful. So like psychologically interesting. A lot of people think it's kind of slow. I think it's perfect that way. I know, it's weird. And then my next favorite is Prometheus, so I'm a real weirdo. Because I love
aligned. We are totally aligned.
I love this. And so I was really excited to see Romulus. I saw it in the theaters I think maybe the first or second week. I had a lot that I loved about it. I thought the world building was really cool. There's some like new, I'm also, as a body horror cannibalism fan, there is a lot of really interesting new sort of like reproductive aspects of the alien that I thought were like fascinating and disgusting and wonderful. And there's some stuff that's like goofy that I'm sure we'll talk about. But also I love the working class roots really coming to the forefront again in Romulus. I think that is something obviously that's very like, I don't know why I'm thinking about fascism a lot, but it's very prescient, I guess. I was thinking a lot about fascist definitions today, and
it definitely feels very appropriate to be recording about this movie this week.
It does,
and, and welcome our billionaire tech overlords. We are here to bend the knee, I guess. I don't know. It definitely feels very prescient to like be kind of like talking about that this week, but that's where we're at. So I think a couple of the things you hit on right there, like the reproductive aspects, the blue collar aspects. Yeah, we're going to be diving into those a bit, definitely a bit today. But Stephen, how about for yourself? Like, where does this kind of, because you are, I think, like we talk about a lot of these movies, like later to the game with a lot of them. Mm-hmm. Where is Alien for you and this one in particular?
I first saw Alien. I stayed up really late one night when I was in college. I think I was home for the weekend, and IFC had Alien, the first Alien on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was the first time I really engaged with it. And I was like, this is wild. This thing is weird, which puts it among the first horror films I had ever seen. Because I really didn't engage with horror until I became an adult in my 20s, mid to late 20s. So this is one of the first horror films that I really engaged with. I didn't sit down to watch the entire franchise until I think about 2019.
Mm-hmm.
I had just finished with my ex-wife watching the Predator franchise, and we had watched the Alien versus Predator franchise as part of that, and she was asking all these questions about the Alien. So I'm like, well, I guess we should watch the Alien franchise next. So I bought it in its entirety because that's who I am fundamentally as a person. And I love the Alien films. I would say my 1, 2, and 3 are the first two, and Prometheus with a bullet. And I would put this one, not to spoil anything, I would put this one squarely at number 4.
Okay.
I really liked this one quite a bit. I saw this one in the theaters. I was coming back through my hometown on my way back from a concert in Ohio recently, and stopped at a movie theater and just decided, hey, let's watch Alien Romulus. Got a giant soda, sat in the back row, and just had a good time. I just wasn't expecting anything more than a popcorn movie, and got a lot more than a popcorn movie. So I had a good time. It's not without its flaws. We'll get into some of the things I think are very flawed about this film, not least of which is it's written kind of like fan fiction. And Fede Alvarez is Garth Marenghi. So, I mean, we'll get into all of that. But this is something I want more franchises to do. We've seen some franchises kind of doing the spin-off, other stories kind of set within the main world of the franchise as a whole. And I love that this has nothing to do on its face with Ripley or with the main lore of the Alien franchise. It's just a story with similar characters set in a similar world. Sometimes I think it gets a little too similar, but I love that we're riffing on within the larger world of the thing. And I want to see more franchises do that. And hopefully this opens the door to allow the freedom for more franchises to feel like they can.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I'm definitely with you on the wanting more franchises to tell one-off stories within those worlds, like kind of exploring the different nooks, because, and we'll talk about here, like it's a mighty big galaxy, and it often feels like these stories get very constrained to one character or one small set of characters, and that becomes maybe a little less interesting over time. And like getting to see how others are affected by these forces, even if they're similar than to some of the things we've seen before, can be kind of fascinating to explore. And I remember like seeing this like opening night, in enjoying it, but also feeling like very frustrated by a lot of the fan service in the movie, like feeling like walking out feeling like that the second half of the movie in particular felt a little bit like too much like winks and nods to what had come before.
Definitely.
And I don't know if we'll be the only show to make this comparison, but at times it felt like Rob Zombie's Halloween, in terms of like what it was going for, or the needle that it was trying to thread. Gave it a rewatch a few days later and found myself, because I'm expecting some of those things, maybe a little bit less turned off by them, because I just, they're already there, and just enjoying like Alvarez craft overall and what he was able to do in some of the set pieces, and appreciating that this is like a practical horror film. Like you're getting like real rod puppets and actors in suits and animatronics, and what you're seeing on screen, with obviously one huge exception and other like digital enhancements. Like it felt kind of like, like Kate had said, like the original Alien film, like you're seeing a real world that's built and not something in green screen. So I've watched it again since that and prep for the show, and have found myself more drawn in by we'll have some legit criticisms, but I think more drawn in by the positive than the negative. Although we have one really big, we won't be the only or the first show to talk about some of the ghoulish aspects of this film, but what can you do? All right. Should we dive into the background a little bit?
Let's do
that. All right. So after Disney acquired 20th Century Fox, they determined, of course, like no IP can go unturned. Like we have all this property. We are going to basically be like mining that field. And at CinemaCon 2019, they announced like a new Alien films in development with more to come. And I guess here's a question for both of you. I think a lot of us were waiting on a third Ridley Scott Alien film or a fourth Alien film from him, like the third in his kind of like prequel series. Prometheus was a smashing success, I think, up until I think it was the most successful overall in the series financially. I mean, not adjusted for inflation or whatnot, but it was a hit. And then Covenant, although it wasn't a flop, it was much less so. I think it did half of what Prometheus did. But it ends on a pretty amazing and dark cliffhanger, which maybe we're never going to see fully resolved. Like, were either of you expecting more of that Prometheus Covenant world and kind of surprised that we went in a different direction?
I guess I didn't know really what to expect. I mean, I would be really happy to see more of that Prometheus world, but I do agree with what both of you said, that like the mining of small stories within a big world is really interesting, and like wasn't something I was expecting and something that I was really excited to see. And then those little touch points of connections to the bigger world is cool.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen Ridley's third entry, but I think after Covenant came out and was received by, I think, a lot of fans as poorly as it was, because I think it was shortly after that we started getting, well, the Neil Blomkamp wants to do an Alien movie, and like that kind of conversation started happening, and it felt like Ridley was just kind of being shuffled off to the side. It felt like Fox was looking at every opportunity to do anything but his third movie at that point. So do I want to see it? Yes. Was I expecting it? No. Would I still like to see it? Absolutely.
Definitely,
am I going to hold my breath for it? Absolutely not. Like, I want to see him do it. I mean, the man keeps pumping out movies. He's in his 80s and he just keeps going. So do I think he could? Absolutely. I don't feel like he actually will, though.
Yeah, I think Gladiator 2 is this month, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, I think Napoleon last year, which was, that's a comedy, right? Like, I'm not wrong in my reading. It's like, you're supposed to read Napoleon as a comedy, correct?
Whether or not you're supposed to, I think it is.
Pretty fucking funny.
Right.
It was really good, but it was like hilarious.
But then he's also got like House of Gucci, and like, I mean, the man just keeps cranking them out. Like Ridley will not be stopped.
I am fully on board with saying, and earlier this week, I think he was asked about like Tarantino saying like, oh, I'm stopping at 10. He's like, what do you think of that? He's like, oh, what a bunch of horse shit. And it's like, really?
And he doesn't mix words either. I love that about him.
He's just a 80-something-year-old crank that just has no fucks left to give.
No,
and
none.
Just says what's on his mind. It's absolutely
love an old
wonderful.
crank.
Yeah, he and Scorsese just preserve them in ember and just let them make movies forever. So
correct. The man has 6 movies like that he's either directing or attached to direct over the course of the next however many years. Like, he's not going to stop.
No. It's like, when you need to take the keys away from grandpa and you can't, he's going to keep going. Except I guess Scott can still drive. So anyway, that metaphor doesn't work.
As long as you can continue to drive.
Yeah.
Keep doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's what you want to do and if it's what you feel like you're good at, then keep going.
Yep. So we tap Fede Alvarez as a director who debuts after some short films with the Evil Dead remake, which I had kind of like reversed the order of Don't Breathe and Evil Dead. I'm like, oh yeah, that could come out first. Like, nope, Don't Breathe is after. Completely memory hold that he did the sequel to Fincher's Girl with a Dragon Tattoo and did like Girl in the Spider's Web. I'm like, that's something that exists.
Yeah, I don't remember this at all either.
Technically it does. I've seen it. I can't tell you a thing about it other than that. Let me just check my notes here. It's bad.
Okay. It's very bad. Excellent. And he's produced a bunch of films as well, like Don't Breathe 2 and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. sequel for Netflix in 2022. So he's done a couple original things, but he's also like veered towards, you know, and this is maybe where the fanboy stuff comes in. He's played with like other people's property a lot. Like he's played with Texas Chainsaw. He's played with Raimi's Evil Dead, and now he's in. And this film in particular, like he seems like tied to the hip with Ridley Scott, and that Scott seems to have a big influence on it. There was like an article I read where Alvarez says he got notes from Ridley Scott, and he's like, they were great notes, but I was like kicking holes in the wall after reading them. Like, how did I miss this when we were doing it? But where are we on Alvarez as a director for these kind of films?
There are things I love about the man, and there are things that just infuriate me about the man. He is like the horror J.J. Abrams.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God.
But it's the same kind of thing. Like J.J. Abrams has made one original movie, and everything else has been someone else's franchise. Mission Impossible, Star Wars, Star Trek. Like he loves playing in other people's worlds. And I feel like Alvarez is very much that kind of guy. And particularly reading through the notes on this episode and listening to him talk about the Alien franchise, he's a fanboy. He's absolutely in the same way that Abrams is a fanboy.
Mm-hmm.
Alvarez is a fanboy, and that comes through in the work. Like I've heard people refer to Jason X as the most expensive fan film ever made. Now it has to be, I would say this, but Rise of Skywalker is right there. So like those have to be like three of the most expensive like fan films ever made, and they read kind of like fan films for good or ill. I think this is the best of those three personally, but you know, it definitely has its share of fan service. And I think that's all coming from Alvarez wanting to make sure that not just the fans are happy, but that he's happy because he's a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are such huge shoes to fill too. Like Alien and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first, are both so much more than, you know, a cannibal movie or an alien movie. You know, psychologically they're incredibly rich, and they have so much to mine. And I think sometimes when you're a fanboy, you're not digging that deep into those things. You know, you're just kind of flattening it, and you're like, cannibals, yeah. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I still liked this movie, but there's something about not being able to, I think, like create your own world and just like playing in other people's worlds that's a little bit just troubling, I guess, as a director. Yeah. I don't know.
I remember reading, like, immediately after this movie was a hit, there were some that were saying, well, now he should do like a Nightmare on Elm Street reboot. Like, he'd be perfect for the material. His sensibilities are great for it. And maybe they are, and I'm sure that he would do a great job with it. But I would much rather see him dive into like making more original horror. I would like to see him create his own iconic characters. I would like to see him build his own worlds, because he's obviously very talented. Like, he has a ton of talent. And I'd like to see him do more than do like the $80 million equivalent of like lining up your action figures and kind of like smashing them together, going pew, pew, pew. Like, he obviously does more with this movie and being facetious, but like you said, Kate, he is playing in someone else's world, and there are going to be limitations to that no matter what happens. Like, there's not only so much you can do before you're going to bump into some sort of restriction.
Yeah, feeling like, you know, you have a quote in here that he tried to make an effort as much as he could to respect the canon. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're like stuck in that, where you're just respecting someone you think is more talented than you, mm-hmm. you there's really nowhere you can go beyond adding to, like, you're adding another movie and it's nice and people like it, but yeah.
Well, that's where I draw the Abrams comparison, because he seems very beholden to Spielberg and Lucas and those guys, rather than diving in and doing his own original thought, his own original idea. You'd say his most original work has probably been in television, and even that does seem to borrow from other things, Alias and Felicity, and even Lost, which he didn't really work on outside of the pilot.
Yep.
But yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Kate. And I think that's an appropriate comparison because although I would say that the sequels to that film, none of them are necessarily like great movies. Like there's a lot of them that are poorly made. They're also like extremely entertaining. Like,
oh yeah.
a lot of them just say there's absolutely no way we're ever going to be able to replicate what Tobe Hooper did, including Hooper himself with part 2 going, people miss the comedy. I'm just going to make a funny movie with part 2.
As much as I love part 2, yes.
It's just like, like you get to part 4 and you have Renee Zellweger basically telling Leatherface to sit down and shut up. And Leatherface does it. And you're like, I'm here for it. It's an absolute, those movies are fun and bizarre. And every single one of them are incredibly watchable because they're like, screw it. There's no way we're going to match the first movie. Let's just do whatever the hell we want. And God love you if you want to put a timeline together of how all those movies fit together, because there is just not enough time in one lifetime to do that and do it correctly. Where here, and I almost feel like when you go back to Prometheus, like that makes Alien not worse, but it kind of like messes with the timeline because you get this idea that no, these xenomorphs has only been around for like a couple decades, where when you watch Alien, you're getting I've always had the idea that I'm watching something that is ancient, that has been around for like millennia, and it's just it's like Lovecraftian. You almost can't comprehend it. Right. And it's almost like Ridley Scott went and he broke his own creation in some ways with like what he did. As much as I love Prometheus, Covenant, I think, is the one that does this. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, some robot created these things? That doesn't seem to make sense. But yeah, I'd love to see Alvarez like hand over the reins in another movie. But what he does really well is that sense of tension, that sense of like palpable dread, that like, let's take our time and use all the elements of film, score, practical effects, lighting, character development, and create these tremendous scenes. And that when this film works, it's because all of those elements are coming together. So the original idea, again, standalone story, completely unconnected to the previous 6 films. Oops. And then it would premiere on Hulu. And like Steven, see your note here, like we're all glad they didn't go that route, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was the biggest mistake of Prey. And I think people were saying it at the time, like, why is this being released directly to Hulu? And then that movie was for Hulu, by Hulu standards, a hit. And so I think I'm glad they learned their lesson. I'm glad other studios have started learning their lesson and starting to get these things released theatrically, if even for a little bit. Like we got Glass Onion in theaters for a few weeks, and that's absolutely a win because that's more than Netflix normally does. But the fact that they were able to say, you know what, we probably could have made a lot more on Prey had we done it in theaters. It's kind of the anti-Zaslav approach, where instead of just shelving your movies and writing them off for tax purposes, you actually put them where people can see them and engage with them. It's and make money from them. It's kind of a wonderful, wild thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big movie, and you should see it on a big screen,
Yeah.
It's a big world.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when Prey came out, they were like, if everybody who watched Prey opening weekend saw it in a theater, it would have made $200 million. And that's probably wasn't going to happen. I think it's safe to say that wouldn't have been the case, but it would have done well. And every dollar it made in a theater would have been, I'm sorry, how many new subscriptions, even like would a movie like this bring to Hulu?
Right.
Like, the idea, if you're going to create these films, like if it's $80 million, you need to bring in so many new people to watch it. And that's like a lot of people that have to subscribe at that point. And I'm kind of glad we are moving past this era of these streaming services only creating content for their services, and that's it, and that's the only place you can watch them. Because like movies that are created for streaming, they always just feel less than. Like there's just, you know,
Amazon Prime, I feel like, has been the best at that, because even some of their big movies like The Big Sick or The Farewell, I think they all got theatrical releases before they ended up on the streaming service. It wasn't like, this is good, we're just going to rush this here. Like, no, go see it in a theater the way it's supposed to be seen. And then when the theatrical run is over, you can find it here on our service. That's the way it should work.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I understood it happened a lot during the pandemic, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. Like, I paid extra to watch The Green Knight immediately because I wanted to see it so badly. But like, I would have loved to see that in the theater. It's such a beautiful, big, gorgeous movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just that, it just kind of, that's another movie that maybe gets forgotten about a little bit. Because like it came out at a time when nobody was going out and nobody was getting to see it. Whereas, I mean, The Substance, like one of the best films of this year, feels like it would have been created for streaming. And now you're getting, like, I remember seeing it in theaters with, I would call all the normies that, you know, when they walked out of that movie, they're like, what the hell did we just watch?
Yeah.
A good movie is what the hell you just watched.
Yeah.
Fantastic film. But even smaller titles like In a Violent Nature, Late Night with the Devil, like those movies feel more like they have a longer sticking point. Like people talk about them longer and remember them more because they're not just going to like Shudder or Amazon or Netflix. I think it's going to be, why am I name blanking right now on who directed Barbie? Greta Gerwig.
Yeah.
I think like Greta Gerwig will be the person that breaks. Like she's doing the Narnia movies for Netflix, and I think she's really hoping to get a theatrical release on those. And I do feel like if anybody right now could have a little bit more pull to do that, like she would have the best chance of.
They should give her
doing
one.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think people have like lost a sense of how important sound design is because they're watching movies on their like shitty little laptops with their internal speakers, which is, you know, how I watch a movie sometimes too. But like The Substance, especially, the sound design was like incredible. And
Kate,
I watched it twice
right,
in the
and you
theater.
should say it. Oh my god, yes,
so good, and like so important to the experience of that movie.
Yeah,
I often tell. I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Steven. You first.
I often say that sound mixing is a lost art, and it's the reason I watch everything with subtitles now when I watch at home, because I cannot trust that the sound mixing is going to be, you know, good enough that I'm going to be able to hear everything that I need to hear on the screen. So yes, I feel like an old man when I do that, but by the same token, one, I am, but two, like sound mixing. Come on, guys, figure it out.
I used to design home theaters for a living, like decades ago, like 10 years, 20 years I did that, like work with people to design home theaters. And it's not only moved away, even if you have like a quote unquote decent system, it's like sound bars now. And, you know, I've moved away from like having a great system to like, yeah, it's a sound bar. It fits in the room, doesn't take up space. I'm like, it sounds really good. It's good enough. And I know I'm fooling myself. Like, I know that I am just kidding, you know, and 25-year-old me would be very sad to see what's on the screen, because I know that I'm missing a lot. And, you know, watching a movie with my wife, I'm like, it sounds pretty good, right? She's like, well, it's loud. And I'm like, yeah, movies need to be more than just loud. All right, moving on to the writing process here. And Steven, do you have the notes up?
I do, sure do.
If you wouldn't mind like doing your best Fede Alvarez with this quote about using Xenopedia as a reference point and trying to stick to the canon and like why that was important to him. I'm not gonna imitate the man's voice. No, don't get it.
I'll give it a dramatic reading.
Could you read it as if Fede Alvarez was, well, I guess Italian versus Spanish? It wouldn't make sense, but do it as Mario from the Mario games. Hey, it's a me, Fede.
I really try that. No. I really tried to make an effort, as much as I can, to respect the canon, not only of the movies, but beyond. It's hard because there's contradictions in the same world once you expand to the novels and everything. Thank God for Xenopedia and things like that. That was always open on my laptop when I was writing to just go and check, like, what era those androids were created. If you want to know, the information is there because someone wrote a novel about it.
That sounds exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessary because, again, you're beholden to rather than creating your own thing, you're making yourself beholden to something else. But again, I think that comes from his own fandom. I don't think he would feel that beholden if he weren't a fan.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, what ultimately is going through his head is I have to do this because I know that I would be disappointed if the filmmaker making this didn't do this. So I have to do it too.
And you got to get the little details right. Like you can't have like the xenomorphs being birthed like in a toilet. Like, you know, I thought I had diarrhea and instead I gave birth to a xenomorph. Like you have to have like the chest burster scene. Like, you have to get those details right. But the subset of persons that are worried about like whatever the androids were created, like is a very small subset that maybe they scream the loudest, but maybe we should stop listening to them.
Oh,
maybe.
Preach, Mike.
So,
preach that good word.
But the other huge influence on this movie that I appreciate is the video game Alien Isolation. And have either of you played this game?
I've not.
I'm not a gamer at all.
Nor I.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was 10 years late to it. Like I bought it years ago and just started playing it like this summer. It's amazing. And the idea of him realizing that this is what can make Xenomorph scary again is fantastic. Because that game is fucking terrifying. Like you basically spend the whole game hiding from a Xenomorph that is like chasing you around a spaceship. And it will track you down. You like, oh, I can hide here. It knows like video games don't know enough. Nope. It starts to predict where you're going to hide. And it's the music cues hit and you're just sweating bullets.
Nice.
So
that's cool.
It is really good. And we'll talk a little more
through.
about it when we talk about the movie. But if Steven, if you don't mind
not at all
doing some voice acting once again with this quote.
Alien Isolation was kind of what made me see that Alien could truly be terrifying and done well today. I played a few years after it came out. Don't Breathe was coming out, or I was waiting for Don't Breathe to come out, and I was playing the game. That's why at the time I was like, fuck, if I could do anything, I would love to do Alien and scare the audience again with that creature and those environments. I was playing and realizing how terrifying Alien could be if you take it back to that tone. The movie is set up in a way that every time something bad is about to happen, you see a phone. In the game, every time you knew there was a phone, you'd go, fuck, I'm about to go into some bad set piece. It's the same thing here. You see they're planted strategically throughout the film. When you see the phone, it's like, brace for impact.
Yeah, and I did not catch that. I caught
Me
the
neither.
phones.
I was watching it this time out, and the one that stood out to me the most is the one that's right outside the door when they're getting ready to go into the room where they're jacking up the heat. There's one like right outside the door to that room, and I clocked that one, and I was like, okay, this is that cool set piece that I remember from the theater. Yeah. But that was the only one that I really kind of like locked in on.
Yeah. They're there throughout the game, and he is right. Every time like you hit one, you're like, I got to save right now or else I'm screwed, because something bad is going to happen here. But yeah, what I most get is like it's the first movie in a while that tries to make the alien scary again, because it feels like even with Covenant, it was like, again, so action oriented. It felt much more like an action film. James Cameron's Aliens, like there's a lot more alien, but they don't feel scary. Like they just feel like this thing coming in again and again. This was the first alien film in a long time that tried to make the xenomorph like actually scary. And a lot of it comes down to like it kind of like hunting the persons down as opposed to just having wave after wave come after it.
It occurs to me that he did something very similar with his Evil Dead remake too. like he kind of took it back to that first movie and how really scary that first film was, because Evil Dead 2 is a comedy, as is Army of Darkness. And so when the remake comes in, he goes, well, I want to make this thing scary again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's really good at that. Like he's really good at kind of taking things back to basics. And maybe that's why he doesn't do his own stuff, is because he likes the basics better, and riffing on those. Maybe, I don't know. I feel like I'm being really mean to Fede Alvarez today, and I'm not trying to be. I mean, I called him Horror's J.J. Abrams. That feels like the biggest insult I can give a man, but I do like him as a filmmaker. There are things he does that I really enjoy, and this is one of them. Like his kind of notion of taking things back to first standards is really, really cool and interesting.
Yeah, I think the instinct with like sequels is always to just be like, aliens, there's more of them. You know, and it's like more doesn't always make it scarier. You know, like focusing in on the detail of one xenomorph is very scary.
Absolutely. I think Cameron famously just wrote, when coming up, like the pitch was like he wrote aliens and then just put like $signs through the S at the end of it.
Yeah, and it's why I don't like it. I mean, I know that's controversial. I know a lot of people love it, but I don't think it's scary to have guns that can shoot aliens, you know, and I don't think it's scarier to have more of them. They start looking like little mice scurrying around, and not
what if there was one monsters that was really big and the mother of all the other ones?
That's the scary one. The mother.
Paul Reiser is also very scary. Just
in
general, like just Paul Reiser, period. Like I remember growing up and grandma would tell us like nighttime stories about Paul Reiser. If you don't behave, Paul Reiser will come and get you. And you know, that was
your punishment for the night was watching Mad About You. Yeah,
definitely. Always a punishment. So all right. Filming of this movie takes place in Budapest from March to July of 2023, emphasizing, again, real-world locations when it comes to designing the mining colony, just for the unique look. And I think that's also where the Texas Chainsaw Netflix movie was filmed as well. Like I think that was Budapest, you know, standing in for Texas, because I guess the two share nothing in common in terms of topography, but okay. But here it really works. Like you have like the mining locale, when you do see it, looks pretty fantastic, feels very lived in. And then the emphasis building real practical effects, building sets for the creatures and the Romulus station rather than a green screen and CGI. The xenomorphs are a combination of animatronics, rod puppets, live actors in costume, and an emphasis is made like get it as close to H.R. Geiger's design, that original look as possible. To that degree, he hires Alec Gillis and Shane Mahan, who worked on James Cameron's Aliens, to bring back and design the monsters. And I think Gillis had worked on a couple of the other films as well. But it was Mahan's first time since working on Aliens where he had helped design the Queen alien in that. So he was really, Alvarez is really excited to have those guys back to work on this film. You know, and Alvarez talked about, and he compared this to what Marvel does. He's like, Marvel is more get bright colors on screen, make it look fantastical. Alvarez wanted a photorealistic look, which he feels like a lot of filmmakers have gotten away from. And he wants audiences to watch this and say, I can't believe this is a thing actually on screen. Like that tangible, pulpy, if you could reach through, you could touch it and feel like that texture of it, which to me is always going to be better than something with just a CGI creation. I don't care how good that technology gets. The Offspring was a full body prosthetic makeup with the exception of the tail, which was CGI. And then ILM did like the post work, you know, adding some digital effects in, but also creating all the miniatures of the Romulus, of the planets, of everything, and having that filmed on a stage in LA.
Yeah, I love that Alvarez insists on working as much as possible with practical effects. It's probably my single favorite thing about him as a filmmaker. I mean, in all of his films, he's very pointed in saying, yes, I want to do I very much want to do this as realistically as possible. I think in Evil Dead, the only CG he used was just for removing wires, but everything else was done as practically as possible, which I love. I think that is absolutely phenomenal. And I think it shows in this movie with, again, that one fairly glaring point of difference, everything else. And I think that probably makes it stand out even more, given that everything else is so grounded and realistic, that element in particular just looks so out of place, even if it weren't so ghoulish.
Yeah.
I love that we're just tap dancing around that for as long as possible too.
Yeah.
It's like the last thing on the notes too. We just buried it at the bottom. We're just gonna people are just gonna have to hold off. I love it so much.
End on a high note.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of casting, like it pulls off like a really impressive cast here. And again, it feels like very much like Alien, where you have like a extremely talented cast and crew, and they're all younger, just starting out in their careers. Like, but you have a real ensemble. You kind of get that here. You have Kaylee Spaney playing Rain, and she's just coming off like her Oscar nomination for Priscilla, and also, which is released as this movie is filming. And earlier this year, she's the young photographer in Civil War. So like hell of a year, like hell of a 365 days for her. And then David Johnson is Andy. You know, he's doing mostly stage work in London prior to this. Like he had done a play in the West End with David Tennant. He'd done a TV series for the BBC too. But he's like the real revelation here. Like Johnson as Andy is probably
so good.
Yeah,
my favorite part easily of this movie,
because he's almost playing multiple characters within one role.
And he plays them so well. Like there's that simplicity, almost childlike simplicity you get from him at the beginning, where he feels damaged in a way, because in reality, and when you get into it, he's a broken android. And then as you move into it, like once he gets the upgrade and he becomes this very cold, calculating, sinister company man, it's the best performance in the movie. And I think in a lot of these films, you can say that about the artificial person character. Winona Ryder in Resurrections notwithstanding, I think by and large, the other artificial persons are the standouts in those films. You've got Ian Holm in the original. You've got Lance Henriksen in the second and third films. And then you've got Michael Fassbender in Prometheus and Covenant. Like just and then David Johnson in this one, like just so incredible, those performances. Unbelievable. So good.
Excellent. Yeah. And I'm going to kind of skip through the rest of the cast just because they're like in and out, and we can talk about them maybe when we talk about the film with more depth. But special shout out to Trevor Noonan as the Xenomorph, like being the guy in the suit. And then ex-Romanian basketball player Robert Bobbers, I'm going to just butcher this name, Bob Krasowski.
Wow, that's a great name.
Yeah. Bob. Robert Bobrzycki, maybe? Zicki? I think so. I don't know.
I sometimes feel like I'm committing a hate crime trying to pronounce names.
I feel the same.
Eastern European names are very hard for me. I don't know why, but I just can't do it.
Yeah. So
and I feel okay because they're just another Catholic white like myself, so it's fine.
Okay. It's totally fine. I had to go to a training on Tuesday because that's what they make us do on election day, and all of the counselors had to go to this training. And at one point I just burst out laughing, and it's because the point they made was super ridiculous, and I started laughing so hard that it just stopped and everybody stared at me. And then at another point we spent over an hour talking about the importance of pronouncing kids' names correctly, and I'm like, you are correct, like totally agree with you, but who got paid to write an hour-long module about this? Like, that is not money well spent. Like, this is common sense. This is called being a decent human.
Yeah.
Yes, and we know from this past week that that's something that's just going to become more and more prevalent in this society.
But I feel like when you're pitching that training to a room full of school counselors.
Sure.
They usually
that's a
get
thing
that.
they know.
Right.
That's a thing we understand.
You would hope. You really would
hope
hope.
they would get that. So someone just gleefully collecting a check going, fooled them again. You know, like someone definitely. The presenter
Someone's
looked
gotta
like
do it.
Moby. The presenter definitely he looked like Moby. And there was definitely a point where I almost yelled, "Okay, Moby, that's enough."
That would have been amazing.
Did you get him to sign your shirt?
What's that? And I did not. He had a really nice shirt. I almost
Okay.
when he asked any questions, I almost asked like, "Where did you get that shirt?" I really like it.
Hey,
You should
Moby, where'd you get your shirt from?
Would have been amazing. So
Tell me
speaking
about
of,
your time with Natalie Portman, Moby.
Oh God, don't.
that would have been. See, that would have been a training I would love to go to.
You just get thrown out of.
Yeah. Anyway, this is the year I actively try to get fired.
Wonderful.
Speaking of criticisms, so if there is a criticism of the cast here, it is that they are going for the Alien model of like it's a bunch of blue collar workers. Everybody looks very lived in. Like no one is ever. I'm gonna scale that back a little bit. They just look like regular people working on a ship. Like you can buy Harry Dean Stanton as a guy that fixes ships.
Yeah,
you can buy Dallas
Yaphet
as like the
Kotto.
guy pilot.
Yeah.
You know, like
I think there just are no Harry Dean Stantons anymore. They don't make them anymore.
They don't hire them. They
don't
exist.
hire them. They make them. Yes.
Right. They just don't get hired for Hollywood movies. I mean, obviously,
Right.
Mike, the insinuation here is that this is a world where even the very young, very attractive people are sold
working
into
the
indentured
mines.
servitude. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
It's like they're, even those people that are in indentured servitude look like they've just come off a glamour shoot. It's like, had a hard day of work in the mines. My skin is perfect.
Yeah.
I've never seen the sun, and yet look at this radiant glow.
Yeah.
And that is just what comes from proximity to radiation for years and years. Let's be honest.
True.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I can buy is the youth because their parents are obviously all dying prematurely. But you would think that as like, you know, if their parents are dying in their 40s and they're in their 20s, they're going to look like they're a hard 20, you know?
And this is not a hard 20. This is what CW teen drama did you just come off of to make this jump into movie stardom? Like that's what everybody looks like here, which, you know, all right, I'm a little jealous because
you're clearly overlooking those coal smudges on their faces and those ratty clothes. Those go a long way.
And the working class British accents, I think, are a nice touch.
Love those.
In the future, everybody is British.
So say we all.
So, score by Benjamin Wallfish. And it does lean into cues. I love this score. Like it does lean into cues
Very
from
effective.
Goldsmith's Alien, Horner's Aliens, some of Prometheus. But it also like it does have like this great electronic pulse to it. It really works on its own as well. I think it's getting a vinyl release mid-month, and it might be with about a dozen bonus tracks. Like this will be like one of the rare like albums I pick up. Like I love the score on its own as well. I think we're all in agreement. Is that works for you guys as well?
Yeah, I think it's great for it has like the dread in it built into it very well, and like I just watched it again. We just did an episode about. I know we've talked about The Substance already, but we just did an episode about The Substance for Tender Subject, and so I'm thinking a lot about sound because that's so important. And I definitely like listened to the sound a lot the second time I watched this movie and was like really impressed with it.
Yeah, it just the way it highlights certain moments, when they use it, when they don't. I feel like not everyone knows how to use a good score. Some scores are great, just they're used ineffectively. This is a good score that's used well.
Absolutely. So last thing, just the marketing and release of this. This gets the coveted popcorn bucket, which are you even a movie in 2024 if they don't release do we have some
I have the Dune popcorn bucket.
It's the Romulus.
So okay. So that's the bucket you can fuck. Okay, you've got the Halloween bucket.
And I have it within reach, so do with that what you will.
Okay,
Okay,
excellent.
all right.
I think that was the Romulus bucket and face hugger. I'm trying to remember what the Romulus popcorn
I'm looking it
bucket
up
was
right now.
But
But I love that is now the highlight of like movie marketing is if you have a popcorn bucket, then you are like officially a effective movie tie-in.
You've made it.
Right.
Yeah.
It looks like there were two. There is one with the face hugger on the side, and then there's one with the Xenomorph head that you can pop open and eat popcorn out of.
There is also for the Femmes, they're the same company that did like a Buffy makeup line did an Alien Romulus makeup line.
Really?
And I want the compact so badly. There's a face hugger compact and a Xenomorph head compact. And like the inside is like synth eyeshadow, and it's great. I would love to buy one. I think they're like $100.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're paying for the case, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Patrons, do your thing. Make sure that Kate gets her.
Oh my God, that would be amazing.
Do that.
I dropped a couple pictures of the popcorn bucket exclusives for Romulus in the chat there. Excellent. If you guys want to take a look.
Excellent. And then there was I think right before this came out, there was a trailer that hit, which kind of harkened back to the in space, no one can hear you scream. And I think that is the trailer that got like a lot of folks excited for this movie. I was a little bit on the fence. I'm like, you're giving away a little bit too much. And I feel like the marketing was centered around the nostalgia for Alien in particular, a little bit of Aliens, but in particular Alien. That it's like, hey, if you liked Alien, we have a movie for you. Am I wrong in that, or does that feel?
No, I think you're right on the bat. It's honestly, it's the thing that put me off this movie initially, to where I was like, I don't feel like I want to see that. And then as word of mouth came out and people were like, no, it's good. Actually, I was like, okay, I'll check it out. But like because I'm not, fan service does not work on me. It frustrates my co-host Brett Wright over at Disenfranchised so much because it works on him too well. And it works on me not at all. Like we went and saw Ghostbusters Afterlife and he's like, this is great. I love this. It reminds me of my childhood. And I'm like, why are we giving the fucking proton pack a hero shot? Like, why is that happening? This is dumb. And so he and I just have very opposite reactions to all that stuff. And so I was like, I don't want to see a movie chock full of Alien fan service. No, thank you. But then as I heard more about it, I was like, I'll check this out. And I'm glad I did. The fan service is definitely there. Like that nostalgia is, I think, well represented in the trailer because this movie is very much trying to pull on that nostalgia.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't like trailers very much anymore. I think they're just like so bloated and kind of like give everything away that I just try not to watch them.
Well, I think you said it earlier in that people don't have the attention span for like long movies anymore. So it's almost like, look, we're just going to give you the whole movie in 2 minutes and then see if this is for you, rather than have any like mystery or hint or something that's going to leave you wanting more. It's like, we'll just give you everything and then you can decide.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Side note, I am kind of dreading covering the Ghostbusters franchise next month, simply because I've only watched the original and the 2016 film, both of which I really like. But those last 2 movies, I am not looking forward to sitting down to watch.
We're going to have fun, Mike.
Reitman.
It's going to be a fun time.
Are you going to get like hostile Mike for those 2 movies?
I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 of them.
Okay.
I liked Frozen Empire a lot more than I liked Afterlife. I'll say that. Fair
enough. Well, what wasn't hostile was the reception to Alien Romulus. What a segue. Comes out August 16th.
Masterfully
Comes
done.
out August 16th. Although this movie was only made for $80 million, which sounds like a lot, but relatively inexpensive for something of this size and scope, it goes on to do like 350 million worldwide, including about just over 100 million here. 40 million of that comes from IMAX, which was the largest number for a horror movie ever, beating Prometheus, which made around 32. Pretty well received critically as well. Like critics, so it's certified fresh. Critics seem to like it. Again, the criticisms we'll get to, I think most are in line, but people seem to really dig this movie. It was for something that was supposed to just go to streaming, this is a huge win. And to both of your points, like why we should take more gambles and stuff like this. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the movie itself, its themes, and what's come up. And the first thing I made a note of is that what sets this apart from like what had just come before it is that shift in tone, where like Prometheus and Covenant are almost like philosophical films. Like it is like at the time like a 70-year-old Ridley Scott pondering what I would call end of life questions, especially with Prometheus. Like,
definitely,
where do we come from? What is the next step? Like, what happens after this? And where is our larger place in this world? It feels like, again, like much like Scorsese in his latter day period, wrestling with his earlier work and saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't like the bad guys so much. And
Cronenberg too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, just like, very much.
Crimes of the Future, Shrouds, just like really thinking about somebody called it his monk phase, which made me laugh a lot versus his monk phase.
That's beautiful. I mean, the entire notion of the Peter Weyland character, the Guy Pearce's character in Prometheus, is literally those questions. Mm-hmm. And what I like about this one is that it puts those two kind of disparate ends in conversation with each other. I think that's what the science officer Rook character kind of represents, is like the company's interest and the philosophical nature of those first couple films, because he's on this very philosophical mission and he's tasking these very blue collar workers with trying to do it for him. And it ends up going about the way you'd expect it to go. But it's putting those two things in conversation and putting those two disparate ends of this franchise and kind of coalescing them here in the middle, which I think is really well done personally.
Yeah, I've been thinking about, just because of this week and the election, there's a Italian Marxist Gramsci has a quote that like I think everybody knows, but it's the old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born, and now is the time of monsters. And I think that really applies to this movie in so many ways. And like the facing, the bigger sort of mythical, philosophical questions of Prometheus with the sort of like working class material conditions of the, cast in this movie and in Alien.
Agreed. Yeah. It's going back to at the core of this, like you can kind of miss a lot of the themes, I think, in this movie and just watch it as like a science fiction, horror, action hybrid. Like you can kind of like glom over those things, but I do think that rather than those bigger picture, almost existential questions that the latter two films are the ones that from Prometheus and Covenant were wrestling with, these are much more grounded questions. Like these are much more questions of our time, going back to like the blue collar workers and the working class roots of Alien. Every life is expendable as long as it benefits the company, and that your contract is really nothing more than indentured servitude in this film. You see, like this is, capitalism taken to its end goal, where we've gone back to the time of indentured servitude, and we see that early with Rain. She's fulfilled her contract and there are no negotiations. It's just the company saying, you know what, there's a shortage of worker because too many people have died. So
including your parents.
Including your mom and dad. Yeah. So we're just going to not only double the time that you owe us, but we are going to now reassign you to the mines, no questions asked, which is basically considered like the least safe environment to work in.
Oh
And
yeah.
there's a shot early on in the film when Rain is debating, like, do I stay or go, where a number of like mining workers walk by and they have the caged canary that they're walking with, which harkens back to the days where mining workers would release canaries into the mines, and if they died, the coal miners knew, oh, there's too much CO2 here, we need to go. But it's this visual of like Rain and her friends being trapped on this planet. And I think that's like a small touch, and it's not the most subtle one in the world, but it's a really nice visual detail early on that kind of like shows the predicament that like Rain and her cohorts are in.
Right. Yeah, Alvarez not a subtle filmmaker. That's where I made the Garth Marenghi allusion earlier. Like, I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards, and I feel like in so many ways, particularly when we move on to kind of the next big theme of the film, I feel like that's where Alvarez is really just like, nope, subtlety out the window. Subtext is text now, damn it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about class, it's a thing that like Americans are pretty scared to talk about in a lot of ways, and it's like you might as well just put it right there for everyone to see, you know, that like if you work for a company that also runs the state, you don't have any out, you know, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is, and that's, I mean, the life they live is a horror. And so they're trying to escape it for something else, something better, and then run into other more different horrors. It's not worse horrors necessarily, but it's, you know, just other horrors. And so the horrors are everywhere. The horrors are universal. There's nowhere you can go to escape the horror, because horror just exists in this world.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, who's the bigger monster? The company or the Xenomorph?
And that's always been, I think, the central question of this franchise. And I think that's, you know, particularly in the second film, and it's one of the things I like most, is you get, the alien queen, who's very, very on its face, I want destruction, I am, you know, and my own survival. Whereas you get kind of the subtle machinations of Paul Reiser working as, you know, a member of the company, and Cameron puts those two in stark contrast with one another, and is basically like, look, everyone sucks. These are both the villains of the movie, and fuck both of them. It's essentially what and this movie does very much the same kind of thing. And Rook again is our stand-in for the company, and then he conscripts Andy by virtue of that chip, conscripts him in as a company man as well.
And very much like all the horrors of this world are created by Weyland-Yutani.
Yes.
You have the conditions on the planet, which are these horrific working and living conditions. You have no upward mobility, like the myth of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you can move from like one station in life to another. Like, that's been completely stripped away, and there's no illusions of that happening in this world. Like, we're not even going to pretend that that's going to be the case anymore. All of that's been created by Weyland-Yutani. But then, I mean, you can make a case like the Xenomorph itself isn't evil. It's just that's its nature. It is doing what its nature is. You can't fault it for that. But what you can fault is Weyland-Yutani for actively, like in the opening scene of this movie, they go out and search for it. It is their own greed and their own hubris to think that they can control this uncontrollable force.
That's all they do for all of these movies is
Yeah.
actively seek that shit out. They want it so fucking bad.
It's like they never, I mean, and corporations never learn any, you know, in real life either, that like there are things that are bigger than us that are not to be trifled with, and you're, you know, the peril that results from not understanding that like humanity isn't the center of everything is like all of these movies, like you said, it's just, you know, like humans keep going after these xenomorphs, and it's like just leave them alone.
I just want to touch the sharp pointy thing. Maybe it won't hurt this time.
Right.
Yeah. Every Alien film, there's like, it's just very easy to avoid any of the danger. Like if you just don't go in that door, if you just like leave well enough alone, you'll be perfectly fine. Like these creatures are never going out and seeking them out. They're just,
Right.
you know, they're doing their thing. And then
Doc, when I poke the alien, it bites me. Well, then quit poking the alien, but it's so fun.
But it's
yeah, and they want immortality. They want, you know, what those xenomorphs got.
Right. And they want to try to, and again, it's all about the genetic experimentation, which, I mean, this movie does, you know, plays that up and carries that theme over from the prequel films as well. That idea of, and attempting to merge DNA. Also, weirdly, in a central plot of the Alien versus Predator films, weirdly, is that kind of genetic experimentation, bizarrely. Like it becomes kind of in the 2000s kind of a central part of the alien mythos, interestingly enough.
Were you both surprised with how much of Prometheus was in this film? Because like it's not, there's no hint of it before you walk into the movie that they're going to even touch on that. It's almost like I thought they were going to leave that completely behind, but it becomes kind of like the driving force of the last third of the movie when like the black goo is then reintroduced.
I really dig it, honestly.
I loved it. Yeah.
It works for me in a way, like, because, you know, you can tell when a certain filmmaker's like, I feel like I need to rationalize this thing that came before and this thing that everyone loves. Like Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi, which I know is a very divisive movie, but he takes kind of the prequel movies that Star Wars fans have notoriously hated for decades and brings them into the world of the the original trilogy, and kind of brings them together in a way that, unfortunately, I mean, I loved it, but a lot of fans found it deeply unsatisfying. But this movie is kind of working to synthesize these two halves of this franchise and bring them together in a cohesive way. And I feel like it works really well.
Yeah, I loved it too. I mean, I didn't know how much of it would be involved, but I think at the end with like I love the goo and I love Prometheus and I love, like, you know, ancient alien shit and just like huge the huge mythos of Prometheus taking place on a, you know, a little old messed up ship is really cool.
Yeah. And it felt like if we're not going to get any more stories in that world, like if like the Fassbender David stories are done, this felt like a good way to like bring that into this fold and then continue it without making it the main thrust. Like, okay, like this is now going to be baked into the lore of the franchise and we're going to use it somehow. And like I think we all agree, like Kate, you had said like Prometheus is your second favorite of the series. Like it's mine as well. Like Prometheus is incredible. I love that movie. And it feels like this was the year that a lot of people were finally able to admit, like, no, Prometheus is really, really good.
That's right. Yeah.
It took a decade.
The three of us have been beating that drum for years, but yeah.
So, you know, there's plenty of room on this ship for that. So we're okay with, it's okay to be correct even when you're late. But the other huge theme, and this ties right back into the original Alien, like when Dan O'Bannon is writing his script, he's like, what if we made men uncomfortable with the idea of sexual assault and rape, and the idea of like the face huggers and impregnating men, and John Hurt's character, like he wanted like men to confront like what that would be like. And that has always been baked into these films, obviously, but I mean, this is one of the first wave of horror movies that have come out post Roe, like post the Dobbs decision. And we're seeing in our art a lot of films that are reflecting on that, whether that's like Steven, you have a huge list here. So if you want to run through that.
Yeah. We've got Immaculate, The First Omen, this film, and weirdly Beetlejuice, like even touches on this bizarrely. Like it's kind of a big year for the forced pregnancy subplot in horror films. And I read on Twitter, someone said before, I completely vacated that hellscape. Someone said horror is always dealing, like, if you want to know what horror is dealing with, look 2 years back. And when did that row get overturned? It was 2022. And so this is, like you said, Mike, the first wave of horror that's really reckoning with that. Because all those films that came about as a result of that are now getting released into theaters after having been in development for the last couple of years. And so and with the week we've had, we're going to be seeing a lot more of that in the years to come, most assuredly.
Yeah. And I mean, I think body horror particularly is so good at pushing at what terrifies us, like, culturally at a specific time period. And just like the things that we can't control about our own bodies are incredibly terrifying. And there's a lot of like use of abjection in this movie, particularly like just sort of the dissolution of like bodily autonomy through like reproduction. And I think that that's like something, yeah, that like hit me really hard watching this movie. All the different forms of like the way humans are used by the xenomorphs to reproduce. Like we get a few new stages of reproduction that we get to see. And I think that the things that are used in body horror in movies like from decade to decade change a lot because of like what like there isn't like an innate, I mean, I guess there are some innate things that scare people, but there are things that scare people more or less, like depending on what's going on in the world, like socioeconomically and politically.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that evolves too as society evolves. The things that scare us change. And like there was a time in the 1930s where the scariest thing you could see was, Boris Karloff in a lot of makeup walking across the screen with his arms out, right? And we're at a point now where the things that scare us are the things inside us. And sometimes just us in general. And so, yeah, to see that evolve and change and how that evolves and changes is a really interesting societal study in there somewhere that I am in no way equipped to lead or to speak on. But yeah, it's a fascinating study, and this movie, I think, really plays with those elements very well.
Yeah. And I know that I've like heard it as a criticism of this film that like this theme is still in there. Like we've done this for multiple movies. Is that why aren't we moving past this? It's too tied into what the original ones do. But I don't think this is a case of like fan service or wanting to replicate what Alien did. I think that this is still like a very relevant topic. And this is exactly, I think the fact that we're 45 years on from the original Alien movie and the needle, if anything, then not only is the needle not moved forward, but it's actually regressed at this point, is exactly why we need to have this explored in our art. Like that's
correct.
I mean, I've said this on other shows that art is what drives empathy and understanding. It's literature, it's movies, it's music. Like that is how persons, I think, best come to understand different cultures, different situations. It's by being able to understand the situations of those characters. And that is what kind of moves the needle and drives a lot of change, which is why it's so often like art is one of the first things that is banned. That's why there are still book bannings or book burnings or record burnings, like because that can be so scary for persons that don't want to see those social changes. They want to keep the status quo. So to me, keeping that in here, and to me, this was the first of the films also that had I think with the character of Kay, like an actual character that like wanted to have her child. Like she was pregnant. It's revealed early on in the movie. And then that pregnancy goes horribly wrong. And this is the first one where you're seeing like what can happen if something goes wrong during this process. Look at the horrific effects of that. This is the first Alien film. I don't say that it's explored very deeply. I mean, it's basically used as a point to get the offspring into the film, but I couldn't help but watch that and not think of what is going on right now in the real world when even persons who want to have kids can't or have to face an unthinkable decision, and there's like they don't have a choice in the matter. Like it's just inevitable what's going to happen to them. Like this is the first film to really touch on that in any way.
Yeah, and like by that point, you know how much the company / the state is involved in those machinations. You know that like this isn't just like an accident, or this isn't simply alien. It's alien controlled by the company state. That like, yeah, again, the true horrors that happen that are against people's wills are like something that have been engineered by humans.
Absolutely.
Agreed. And when we talk about free will and we talk about will, I think this may be an interesting or like the relevant time to talk about Andy a bit and David Johnson here, because another theme throughout these films is like artificial intelligence. And obviously it's something that Ridley Scott had near and dear to his heart. He would continue that with like Blade Runner and such. Right. But this idea of where does Andy stop being just like this robotic creation and he is like a actual, if not person, like an actual being that has his own thoughts and impulses and free will. And I think that David Johnson, like probably the best portrayal of this sort of character since Lance Henriksen in Aliens. Like that first, like we have real empathy for them. He's a real, especially as a newcomer, like a goddamn revelation in this film. I did see him in a short film at Telluride Horror where he merges with the puppet that takes over his body. He's awesome. And I'm like, is that David Johnson in this like very like weird, funny short film out of nowhere? And yes, it is. I'm like, so I can't recall the name of it.
Not me Googling that right now.
I will find that in the program and send it later on. But what do we think of Johnson
Meat Puppet
here? Yes, that is it. Meat Puppet.
Cool. I'm gonna write that down.
It was really fun.
Looks
plays a
wild
boyfriend that like misses his and his girlfriend's graduation because he's ordering collectibles. And he gets the wrong one. It's pretty awesome. So,
that's what you get for ordering too many Funko Pops.
Yes,
relatable AF, I'm afraid.
Exactly it. But what do we make of Andy here?
He's it's a phenomenal study. He's the kind the kind of artificial person that we're allowed to empathize with, because the other examples, and I keep kind of sidelining Winona Ryder's Call from that list because she's not a particularly, I'm afraid, memorable character. I'm afraid, but the other ones, you've got Ash and David, who are just so blatantly and on their face evil. And then Lance and Andy, Bishop and Andy, you can relate to those guys. They are, they're the more human artificial persons, the ones that can show, and in a world where even the artificial persons are seen as unfeeling, you get like the stories like Ripley's experience in the first film with Ash, basically turning on everyone on the ship to preserve this specimen and allowing it to run rampant. And then like Bjorn's experience with the synthetic who conscripted his mother to death because there were a dozen other miners on the other side who needed to live. And you see both sides of that from Andy throughout the film. Once he gets kind of conscripted by the company, he is that cold, unfeeling machine of a person. He's the company man. everything benefits the company. But as soon as that's turned off, or before that's even turned on, he's every bit as human as everyone else. He's devoted. He has feelings and emotions. It took me a while, even after the reveal of him as an android, to realize that he was an android. That's how human that character is portrayed. And I think his performance is a masterclass, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he was created to be, or I guess recreated to be her brother,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and like the care that the two of them have for each other is real. It's very real, you know, and I mean, I think people always, you know, this is like the Alien franchise is one of those franchises where you can spend a lot of time thinking about like what actually makes a human and what doesn't, you know, like if we're also all just like synapses, what's different between us and like a synthetic. And I love particularly like the way the synthetics insides are, because that always makes me think about like they didn't need to be goopy but they are, you know, and they have like things that almost look like intestines. Like they're not on the inside, they're not like cold robotic machines. They're like wet and full of tubes and stuff just like we are. And I think that like drives that point even more, you know, that like they're very similar to us, they're just different.
Yeah. And to your point about Andy and Rain having that kind of like sibling relationship, we also see the limits of that in that Rain, when she's has to make a decision, she's like, okay, if I leave this planet, it's going to mean that like Andy's going to get decommissioned, but I'm going to benefit. My friends are going to benefit because like we'll be able to live on like an uncommissioned planet. There'll be sunshine. I won't work in a mine. The drawback is like I will no longer have my brother. So you can see where that's when she's weighing in the idea of like, well, he's not really my brother. Like he's been created for me, but that only travels to a certain point. And it's even pointed out later.
I was going to say, he calls her on that. Yeah.
How could you, you know, not open the door for Kay? He's like, oh, how could I not leave someone behind? And that's when he's in that unfeeling. And that even harkens back. I mean, he's making the right choice, very much like Ripley in Alien saying, probably shouldn't bring John Hurt back on the ship. Like he's probably infected with something.
Right.
This is protocol, and no one listens to her. Except here, it's a little bit less done with a bit more of that cold like rationality to it.
Yeah. And it's I mean, it's a powerful moment in the film where he's just like, oh, what, you mean leave someone behind? And I don't think the Andy that we meet at the beginning or the Andy that we're with at the end would say that. That's the kind of the cold calculating Andy. He otherwise he would go along with it because it's what's best for Rain, or it's what Rain has decided is best for Rain. Yeah. But at this point, he's got a little bit more of his own. And as a result, he can be a little colder. He can be a little more unfeeling. He can be a little bit more of a hardened bitch, frankly.
Yeah. So then I think that is like, it's a different exploration of the synthetics here. And I think that speaks to like when this film is really working, it's Alvarez doing its own thing. It's Alvarez exploring his own territory. And there are some incredible set pieces here. You know, I mentioned Alien Isolation before, and there are some of those aesthetic touches like the phones. There's the portals that they crawl through and the face huggers crawl through also are a big part of that game. The look and design of the Romulus in that emptiness, and also just the idea of we are on an abandoned space station and we need to get off of it and find a way off. That is the plot of Alien Isolation. In that game, it is Ripley's daughter who has like found out that her mother may be alive and she's gone here to get the evidence. There was some fear like heading into this, like, oh, is like Rain's character going to be like Ripley's kid? I'm glad they didn't go that route.
Very glad.
But the other thing about this film, the structure of it feels very gamified. Like the way this film is put together, it's like short section, here's an objective. Short section, here's your next objective. Like all of these set pieces, like build and build, almost like you're going through levels in a video game until you get to the big boss at the end, which is the offspring. Just little things like we need to find, oh, we've gotten to the pod, so we don't have the fuel. You have to go to this part of the ship, get the fuel, and then come back safely. You have to find the key, the object in your thing in order to open
yeah,
this
you're
door.
right.
You know,
MacGuffins everywhere.
all of these
Yeah.
little things that make it feel like a video game, but it works here. It doesn't feel too forced. But what are some of the set pieces of this that you really dig, like that in terms of like what works? Before we get listeners to the stuff that we're going to be like, God damn it, why'd you do this?
I think I love Bjorn's death a lot, and I
Yes.
love the reveal of this like giant vaginal
Mm-hmm.
like a chrysalis,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And like literally he is sticking a cow prod into it and like probing it and thinking that like, you know, by sort of like penetrating it, he can destroy it in this like very ridiculous but like amazing phallic way, you know, that it's like, oh, here, let me destroy this with my like sort of patriarchal order. And then the Xenomorph is like, absolutely not, you fucking idiot.
Even Carol Clover sees that and is
Yep.
like, that's a little obvious.
I know. I was thinking about Carol Clover and like Barbara Creed with you know, the feminine, the monstrous feminine, and like the I guess disruption of that like patriarchal order where you're like, oh, I know what to do. Like I learned earlier that like you can use cattle prods to like kill these things off, but no, there's no order to this. Like this is not a thing you understand.
No. Yeah, and once again, someone please get Fede Alvarez the definition of the word subtext. Please and
but
thank
it
you.
works here.
No,
and
it
this,
does.
yeah, it's amazing, and I think the use of like the acid blood also as sort of like acid discharge is like disgusting and amazing. You know, that like this is this like stuff that just like pours out of this big giant vagina and kills him. Like, oh my god.
Yeah. It doesn't get any clearer of a theme of like, don't prod the giant vagina without being asked to first. Like, consent is key. It is, but also like in all of these films, like we've heard about the alien blood, it's acid and it's going to wreak havoc. And really to this point, like the most we've really seen has been like it eats through the ship's hull. But not to the point where it destroys it. Like this is the first real acid blood death that I can think of, or at least the first memorable one to me. If there is like a one before it, I just don't remember it. And it's
Cameron uses it a lot with the Marines kind of firing haphazardly
and
kind of flattering back on them. But again, in terms of memorability, it's this.
Yeah, it's mostly in that, like, you don't use certain machines against it because you know that, like, the blood, you know, if you use a gun, it's going to be bad news. But, like, yeah, this is very much more, like, biological.
This is, like, the drippings and the way it's executed first with the fingers, like, the flesh melting off the fingers, and then, like, his arms basically dissolving, like, the craters in his arms dissolving, and then as it eats through his chest, like all of that air in the lungs just expanding and blowing out his chest. Like it's a really well done. And also, like, we haven't talked about him, but Bjorn is the worst character in this movie. Like he is like in the Friday the 13th remake, I think it's Chad, the guy that you can't wait to see bite it. Like there are almost no redeeming qualities about this person whatsoever.
Yeah, like he's the id like out of control, and it's like you get a little bit of redeeming quality, like that he's pissed because of what happened to his mom. And so you get a little bit of like an explanation for why he's such an asshole, but like not enough.
No.
Right.
So it's like you kind of have that moment where you're like, which is even better, I think, than like someone dying and you hating everything about them. But like, you get that moment where it's like I sort of get it. I understand why he's so pissed off, but also this is great. I'm loving this.
Yeah. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't be mean to Andy. Come on.
No. He's just shouty too. Like everything is just like him shouting. Like that's his. Are we supposed to take away that he is the dad of Kay's baby? Like, is that what? Because
I wasn't sure.
Some asshole.
I don't know what to make of that. Like the fact that we don't know who the father of the thing that will eventually be the offspring is, almost feels vaguely like it's supposed to be vaguely messianic. Like this, and I know we will talk more about the offspring later, but like just the notion that is supposed to, like the fact that we don't know who the father is, maybe it's something cosmic, or it could be Bjorn, or it could just be some other dude, who knows. Like yeah.
And then skipping ahead a bit, both the alien blood I thought like was a really creative idea of like taking that gun and then, hey, we're going to go to like the zero force gravity, we're going to shoot through all these aliens, and then we're going to have to float through it. Like that was like also another like really creative way to make use of that biological feature, and it's not something that we have seen yet, and it's also like maybe one of the best payoffs of a dad joke in any film ever. It's like dad joke, as someone who's a dad and loves dad jokes for the win. Finally, we had our moment in movies. But again, just super creative, and it's a little detail, but the idea of like, oh, if you just aim it, it will autocorrect and aim for you, I think answered, whenever you watch these movies and a character who's never so much picked up a steak knife and all of a sudden they're like, what if Rambo, but better? Like that always like just doesn't stick. And here you get like, it's a small explanation, but that makes sense. And it was really well done. But her and Andy floating through the acid after, like there's a real sense of like, this could go horribly wrong. I love that as a set piece.
So much tension to just them floating through that like wash of acid. It's such a tense moment. I mean, it feels very, you like you mentioned here in the notes, feels very gamified, very, this is a video game level, but it is really tense and really cool. Like I could see both in equal measure when she's like coming face to face with that giant wave and she just flips the gun and fires and just ducks down onto the platform. Like masterful. So good.
Yep.
I'm a sucker for an elevator shaft scene. Always have been. I don't know. I'm deathly afraid of heights, so that probably has a lot to do with it. But like one of my favorite set pieces in like Star Trek V, which is a movie I generally don't like, is the elevator, like when they're in the Jeffrey or the turbo lift.
I've never seen a Star Trek movie.
Wow.
Oh, Mike, that hurts my heart. I grew up on that shit. I love it so much. And it's a very much kind of an opposite side of the coin from this, from Alien, really. It could not be more different. But so the scene where, and particularly adding the zero gravity element to it, I think really works well. And I just remember seeing that on the big screen in the theater and just being really jazzed by, she's floating in that thing and there's the alien and then David's further up. And oh my God, I love it so much. It's so good. It's so well executed too.
It's where you start to get into that fan service a bit too much in how it concludes. But yeah, it is
agreed.
Really well done.
Up to that moment, I'm loving it.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
Factory. My God, that's what I thought of. And I was like, is that really weird that I thought of that?
Nope, on brand.
So That, yeah, very much on brand for us. I thought just the whole early in the film when they're like in the room with the face huggers or trying to find the fuel, everything all the way through the crash is like super exciting. First, like the use of the red lighting there, it's almost Giallo-esque in a moment.
Yeah.
We're almost dipping into Argento territory. And
Ooh, yeah.
Andy, when he freezes and is rebooting, like
Mhm.
just that image is a bit shocking and a bit scary.
And his
But-
eyes flip around and they've got the
It's
company logo
beautiful.
on the back.
Yeah.
But when it
Yeah.
pans up from him and you already know, like we've already seen, and they're completely unaware this room is heating up, but they don't understand that this is causing like all the face huggers to kind, and they don't know what those are anyway, to kind of
Mhm.
like start to melt and start to like heat up and come alive again. And you have like this pan up shot of just like one of them breaking out of its little prison and then going on the loose, and you see more and more. Like that's a great scene. And I mean, we've seen like it's a first time in a while that the face huggers have felt like a real threat in
Mhm.
some ways, just for the sheer volume of them. It's a great action set piece.
Yeah, there's something too I was thinking about that is kind of cool for the viewer, that at this point we know so much about the xenomorphs and the facehuggers, and they know nothing.
Yes.
You know, and it takes place, this is like in between Alien and Aliens, right? Yeah.
Correct.
So like they don't know anything about what's happening out in space because they're just on this colony. And like we know a lot of the like next phases, like when the face hugger attaches itself to I don't remember her name.
Navarro?
Soft butch that I'm in love with.
Navarro.
Yeah. You know, they don't know anything about what to do. They've never experienced it before. So it's like we know how scary it is. They're discovering how scary it is.
And that's a great recipe for, I mean, that's Hitchcock's recipe for tension,
Mhm.
is put your characters in a situation that they know nothing about and the audience knows exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
And I think that's why so many, up until Scream, so many horror movies operated on the none of these characters has ever seen a horror movie before kind of formula, because that's how you would drum up tension, except it eventually became not tense. But I think it works really well here because you absolutely believe these people would have no context for any of this stuff. They've been on a mining planet their entire lives. So when those threats start to rear their ugly heads, they're going, what the fuck is this? And we're going, oh shit, they're fucked.
And it's so fast too. The other thing too is they don't really have any time to step back and think about, well, what should we do? Like everything is in the moment. Like either you're getting attacked by dozens of these face huggers and you just have to like ward them off by any means necessary, or they're breaking through that glass and running you down, or your friend is getting choked to death by it and you need to figure out how do we remove it in the moment. Like we don't have any time. Like there's no taking a step back. Like even if you had seen a horror movie at that point, you don't have the like, well, what plan of action should we take? Like everything is so reactive.
Yes.
And that leads into like one of the really cool visuals here. Like we all know that you're always going to have a chest burster scene. What can you do that's new? What if we have this like ultraviolet X-ray gun where you can see it moving around the Navarro, and it is so cool.
Yeah, I agree. It's and again, it's something that Alvarez does really well. Finding a new way to freak you out with something you already know really well. Again, that's like his bread and butter. This is a thing we all know. Everyone's seen an Alien movie. How can we ratchet up the tension and make this even more fucked up?
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising, even if you know, like something's bursting out in like a couple minutes. She doesn't know.
Nope.
And then, to like the horrifying visual of seeing what's inside of you that should not be inside of you. It's like forever scary.
And also poor Kay, who was just on the ship having a nap. Like she's got morning sickness. She's just sleeping. And the next thing you know, she wakes up and this little tiny alien bursts out of her best friend's chest. And she has no idea
Nope.
Like, I saw this elsewhere earlier in the, I think it was last month. Someone's like, you could rename Texas Chainsaw Massacre like Franklin's no good, very bad, very horrible day. And I feel like that about and I think the tagline was, it started with him falling into his own piss, and then
Oh yeah.
got
It
worse.
just got worse. Yeah.
It just you could do the same thing with Kay. It started with her puking into a toilet, and then it just ended with her getting devoured by her giant baby, alien baby.
Right.
Pour one out for her. She had the worst day of anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and she had no explanation of anything, no reference point for any of the things that happened to her.
No.
So here's the question for both of you that I thought of, because I think of these things. There's the age-old question, how many kindergartners can you beat up at once if they all come at you? And the correct answer for me is 11. Don't ask how I know, but 11.
As you work with children, Mike, I don't know that I want you to answer that question. How you know?
They're fast.
You're thinking about that too often.
Yeah, they're fast. There was a kid last year who came to our school, the cutest kid, and I don't work with the kindergartners. I'm not super good with little kids, but we had to help out one day, and he knew one word, and it was bash. And when he said bash, you were taking one in the nuggets. It was just, that was the next step. Yeah.
Oh,
so
no.
That's how I learned. Don't ask how I learned about that. Anyway, how many tiny baby xenomorphs do each of you think you could take? When it just spurts out of the chest and it's really small and tiny, could you take a couple of them, when they're that size?
No.
Fair enough.
No. They're so fast.
They are.
Here's one thing I've learned about myself watching horror movies. I am the first guy to die in every horror movie.
Okay.
I'm a fat man. I'm very out of shape, and I'm very slow. So if it comes to me having to run from something, I'm done. If I have to throw my weight into something, I might have a little bit of a chance as a very large man. However, I can only do that so many times before it loses all effectiveness. So either way, I'm the first one down. In fact, I'm not even the guy who gets to fight the chest burster. I'm the guy getting the chest burster busting out of him. That's who I am in an alien film.
I appreciate that honesty. I'd like to think
I know who I am.
I'd like to think that I do move pretty well for a big guy. I'm pretty quick for a bigger guy. And I have dad strength. So I'd like to think I could take one. But then when I think about it, I also feel like I'm acting like that sixth grader who was adamant that he could defeat a bear in a fight. And I'm like, I really want to put this to the test. I really just want to put you in a room with a bear and see who walks out. So I'm probably deluding myself.
Yeah. I think I could probably run and maybe hide fairly well. I'm petite. I can get into small spaces. But then the time that you're running and hiding is when it's shedding its skin and it's growing very quickly.
Right.
I always think I'm kind of similar in that I have had type 1 diabetes since I was a little kid. And so I'm I'm going really fast. The first time my blood sugar goes low and nobody has any sugar for me, there's not much I can do about it. I'm going to run out of insulin in a couple days. Oh, well.
Okay. So basically we're all screwed.
Yeah.
We're all screwed. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
I would let myself be taken. Yeah. I think once I saw the big Xenomorph, I'd be like, let's go.
I've had a good run. I've had a good run.
Just put me in one of your weird nests. Yeah.
Yeah. There's fight or flight, and I'm more the freeze guy. So again, I see something terrifying, and I'm just like, oh shit, that's a terrifying thing. And the next thing I know, I'm dead. So
we've talked about a lot of things we love, and I think that we need to kind of move forward a little bit here and talk about where the film goes wrong. And there's really one big thing, and there's a lot of fan service, which we'll get to, but I could probably live with a lot of that if it wasn't for like the AI Ian Holm is
Yeah.
Rook,
Fuck it.
which to me just feels really good. It felt as ghoulish today rewatching it as it did on the first watch. Like just you know, on the Texas Chainsaw podcast we're doing, like we're talked about like the first like minute of that film, and when like, you have the corpse posed on the monument, and like the argument, the thing I argued was like, when you die, if you're guaranteed one thing, it's rest. It's like no matter how awful your life was, how hard it was, at least you get peace at this point.
Right.
And the use of like CGI to bring back these long dead performers, or AI to bring back these performers, it feels like that's disturbing someone's rest. Like it's enough is enough.
Right.
And it really pulled me out. What it did is it pulled me out of the movie completely. Like now I'm like, instead of focusing on like this exposition scene, I'm like, what are we doing here? This feels gross and exploitative. But I have not heard anyone make the argument yet that this is like a good thing. So I'm wondering where both of you stand.
I mean, the only thing that's interesting that I have been trying to figure out how to like get around is it is cool to see, like, it's cool that it is a known synthetic at first, you know, they're like, oh, okay, I know who this guy is. I know what his intentions are, and I know that they're not good. I know not to actually trust him.
That's a good point.
I don't know how to accomplish that, like, otherwise, you know, without doing something ghoulish. Ooh, yes.
I know. You do a Michael Fassbender cameo.
Yeah, that would be so
the other
cool.
One. He's the other one who's just on his face blatantly evil. And so, you see Michael Fassbender in this part, and oh, I don't trust that guy either. He is another bad synthetic. You can do Lance Henriksen if you want to maybe like play with
fatherly one, yeah.
Or like play with our expectations. Like you think he might be on the up and up, and then you realize he's evil. Like if you want to fuck with your audience, you cast Henriksen. But if you just want to know who this guy is and what he's about, cast Michael Fassbender. Like that would have been so incredibly effective and easy, and not a way to like wake the dead to make your movie. Like we don't need to bring back Peter Cushing and Carrie Fisher. I had Donald Pleasance in my notes here, but Mike told me that was a real dude and not actual CGI Donald Pleasance. But like, we don't need to bring those back for these like big budget movies. It feels like these movie studios are Weyland-Yutani, and that even in their deaths, these actors are still under contract, and they still have to fulfill these contractual obligations to their corporate overlords. It feels fucking gross.
I mean, there's a horror movie in that for sure, which would actually be really interesting. But I think like the thing I was talking about before, that like the synthetics have like, you know, gushy, wet, like human bodies, by like then making this one CGI, like really takes everything out of that, you know, like it doesn't look real, it doesn't feel real.
Alvarez said that there was
it makes me so angry. He's like, his chin is like sunken into his neck.
Yeah. Alvarez had said that it was an animatronic, but that face is moving by CGI, and I don't know if it was just the animatronic wasn't realistic enough or whatever. And like, yeah, sure, you get Ian Holm's widows, like you get their permission, but like at what point does it end? Like at what point can your offspring be trusted to like not just trot you out for a quick buck? It's like before long, movies are just the only actors in movies are just dead actors. Like Bruce Willis has signed his rights away so that he can continue to make money with his dementias on setting. Like he sold his likeness away for a certain amount of money, so Bruce Willis can be in your movie after he's gone. Like, and I have a feeling there are going to be a lot more clauses like that, and with the prevalence of AI, we're going to see a lot more of that shit happening, and I think it's really fucked up.
Like, are we going to get It's a Wonderful Life 2, where this time like Jimmy Stewart actually takes down like Potter, like he goes after him, guns a-blazing. Like that's, you know, that's the premise of it. Like, is that what we're going to be doing here at some point? Like, I don't want to live in that world.
Yeah.
No,
And
I
like
don't either.
the people who are doing that kind of stuff are like really proud of like what they have made. Like, you know, the people who are like, oh, I took the Mona Lisa and added a bunch of stuff around her. Like, if you've ever wondered what else is in the painting, and it's like, no one has ever wondered.
Zero people have ever
There
wondered
is
that.
nothing else because it's a painting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ugh, ridiculous. So dumb.
It's just odd, and it's done in such a way that it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense to have it, and it just pulls out of the movie. And I think you're both right. Like, in a movie that is, you know, critical of like, look at this late stage capitalism. If you take it to like the nth degree, look how horrific it is. And then you do something like this, and it's like, hey, even after you die, you will not have any autonomy over yourself. But also, there is a working actor not getting a role, not getting to perform, not getting to be discovered because this is what's going on in its place. So like, how many people are going to eventually be replaced? And for this like, kind of like really soulless art, you know, the Halloween Ends, like that is it was actually not even an actor. It was like one of the people working in production design, like building the sets. They're like, you kind of look like Donald Pleasance. You're going to play Loomis for this scene. That's a really like creative way to do it. Yeah, they put prosthetics on him, and that was like a really creative way to do that. Like, if you really want to bring Ash back as Rook, find someone with a passing resemblance and do it.
At least cast his kid, like, or do what they did on Furious 7, and like they cast Paul Walker's like brothers to like finish his scenes for him. Like, there are ways around that if you really want to get around it, or if you just want to. What they really want to do is just, we want to show off how far the technology's really come, and fuck that. Fuck.
I also think the Fassbender of it would be amazing.
That would have been so cool.
He's so delightfully evil. Like, we all know how evil he is now too.
And you would have
his little flute.
It would have the flute. I'll do the fingering. Like, it would have been such a cool thing to where, instead of like drawing your brain back to the first Alien film, which is again clearly what Alvarez wants you to do, it draws your mind back to Prometheus and merges those two ideas together in an even much more cohesive way than he's already doing. I think it would have been a much better call and a much better fix for this particular issue. But again, we don't get to show off how cool the technology is if we do that.
And I think the problem with it is like, you go from that, and then all of a sudden, all of these other fan service moments like really stick out. They're very jarring.
Yes.
How many, it just hit me, like, how many Alien movies end with like the short-haired, brown-haired woman at the end of the film, like sends the alien out of an airlock, and then she goes into hypersleep.
Yeah.
Like, that is almost every single
many
movie,
of them.
And you get that ending here.
Yeah, and it doesn't play with like the final girl trope at all. Like, that is the only one that apparently is okay. Like, you know, the final girl is often like the, you know, the most, or not the most, but like slightly more masculine, where like, you know, Kay is super femme, and like she can't be the final girl, you know, like she had sex, which we all know about because she's pregnant, you know, and it's like,
that's a big
all
no-no.
those like all those things that we all know now like can be broken. Why wouldn't you break that a little bit?
Because you're so beholden to the original,
right?
Is really what it comes down to.
And there's the "you have my sympathies" line lifted right from Alien. Kay's moment, it wasn't her death, but Kay's moment getting hunted by the Xenomorph, it almost felt like a Xerox of like Harry Dean Stanton's death in Alien, like the whole aesthetic, like
there was water dripping.
How she's like lifted up, all of that felt like it. And then, like, to me, the real egregious one is like Andy's saying like, "Get away from her, you bitch," and like a callback to Aliens. And it doesn't make any sense in the context of the film. There's no need for it. And to me, it's kind of like we need to stop having these moments in movies that are just there to have like the audience like point at the screen like DiCaprio and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like we're
Yeah.
not circus seals. And
or what Hollywood would like to presuppose is, are we?
yes, what
Right.
if? So to me, it's like too much of that. And I don't know how much of that is like Alvarez, like you said, Stephen, indulging that inner fanboy, like being like, what if you and I were making these movies and we grew up on all these like 70s and 80s horror movies? Like, is that what we would do, or it be fan service?
And I feel like you can look at his Evil Dead movie and see some of the same things happening there too, which is why I tend to want to point the finger at Alvarez direct. And he wrote the script too. It's his script. So like it feels, I feel like that's very little studio interference and more Alvarez just geeking out about this shit.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some things in that Evil Dead remake that were mandated by the producers. Like, for example, Rob Tappert went to Alvarez and said, you know, they didn't have like the tree rape scene in the original version of the remake. And I think Alvarez said after, he's like, that was mandated by one of the producers. And it was pretty heavily insinuated that it was like Rob Tappert came to him and said, this needs to be in here.
That's the worst part of that movie, too.
Which is funny because Raimi has said if I redid The Evil Dead today, like that's what I would leave out. Like that would be the one thing I would definitely take out. And Tappert was like, nope, that has to go in. But there are some other indulgences that are there. And there's a meanness to that movie, too, that is tonally it feels very much in line with it. Some of that works, but some of it's too much. Last thing I have here is, I think, one of the better creations of this, like one of the better original things. And how do we feel about The Offspring? Like, and I put, is Keep 'Em Separated still a banger? Because again, dad jokes.
Come Out and Play, I believe, is the name of that song. And that and Pretty Fly for a White Guy are still in my rotation, Mike. So... but in terms of maybe, you know, The Offspring and our main characters, maybe you ought to keep them separated.
Oh,
very good.
No, it's a really cool design. Really unnerving. Giving it the face of an architect from Prometheus is a really nice touch.
Oh, I fucking love it. Yeah.
It's such a nice touch. And the fact that it's all a bodysuit on this like really tall, weird looking dude makes it even better. Do we know if he's weird looking?
Do we know if this gentleman is weird looking? Are we
Mike? I'm going to send you a picture of this guy.
Is he? Does he
That's
look
his
like
IMDb page.
Does he look like someone not allowed to live near schools?
No, he's just a very tall, oddly proportioned gentleman.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough.
Kind of like your Carl Stryken from like the Addams Family.
Okay,
like he just very tall, very oddly proportioned.
Or like Doug Jones, kind of man. Yeah. I mean,
but like his neck is the size of his head. Like his neck
like a
is
wonderful future in being a creepy, weird monster guy. Like, like, hello, Guillermo del Toro.
Right? Call this dude Guillermo.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's such an unnerving look to the thing. Like the way it moves, the way it acts, and the childlike nature of the fact that it's an infant and operating under its basest instincts. Like its first instinct is to feed. Like there's that painting at the beginning of the film, toward the beginning of the film, with like the Black Plague and like the bodies in piles. And if you like look at that painting, there's an image of an infant suckling at its dead mother's breasts. And that's essentially what this thing does. Is its mother is dying and yet it's hungry and needs to feed. And she like reaches under her shirt and like pulls out this like black goo.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like, she's lactating that shit because that's what it eats. Like, and again, kind of playing on the body horror and the horror of loss of bodily autonomy for women, like all of that kind of coming into play in this one really imposing figure that combines everything that terrifies us about ourselves and everything that terrifies us about a xenomorph, all in one terrifying package.
Yeah, and all the terrifying things just about pregnancy, like how disgusting in a lot of ways pregnancy is, you know, like, you know, and like, not, you know, for all intents and purposes, like you are growing a parasite that is feeding off of you, you know, I mean, it's
For
true.
years,
It's like, yeah,
even
it's not
after
like,
it's born.
yeah, till they're 18. But yeah, like, you know, this is that heightening, literally, of like of the horrors of pregnancy.
Yeah.
And you know, the, like, I think you talked about this at the beginning, Mike, that, like, you know, the aliens they're not bad, they're just different. Like, they don't know what we do, and don't really understand us as much as we don't understand them. So it's like, you know, their innate first need is to feed, and like that they don't just, I guess, like, nicely, well, honestly, breastfeeding is painful anyway, but like, you know, they take it to a heightened level of like absolutely destroying the host mother.
Right.
Yeah, and this is the first, it's almost like we talked about Cronenberg earlier, but the beginning of The Fly too, like the birth scene here, it's very, very similar. And this is like the first birthing of one of these like alien creatures that is not right through the chest. Like it's a more traditional labor, just accelerated and even more horrific and painful. And I wonder, because this is a hybrid of like human and xenomorph and the engineer folks, if like that hatred of mankind that is within the engineers, that like rejection of what, because it's my reading of Prometheus is like they created man, like that they are the gods, as it were.
Right. They created them and then want to destroy them.
Yeah.
Correct.
If that hatred of their creation is kind of like part of the baked in DNA of the offspring, that when it sees, you know, first its mother and then Rain, if it's already genetically predisposed to like, oh, this is something that I will reject, I have to destroy because it's horrific. So that is also in there as well. And it's just like also just a cool design, and the way it's shot as well, like the whole scene with like the smoke and the lighting as well, and it just kind of creeping along. One of the first like really genuinely scary and terrifying new things to come out of this franchise in a long while. And it does give me some hope that, okay, if we're going to play with this in Romulus, then if we do other things, like, can we open that sandbox up either further? Because if there's a, you know, when you criticisms of Covenant and, you know, Prometheus, is that at the end of Prometheus, when you see, I think it's called the Deacon, the Deacon just looks like a slightly different xenomorph. Like it's not really that different. And that feels like, hey, here's a studio note. You need to have this at the end so we can more,
so that we understand that this has been an alien prequel. Yeah.
And I guess fun fact about the Deacon is that it keeps growing and growing, and eventually it I guess canonically it becomes a mountain. Like in the comics,
that's cool.
that are, yeah, like that's the canonical end of that, is that it just grows and grows and becomes a mountain.
Put that in a fucking movie. I want to see a
cool.
mountain-sized xenomorph. Yes, please.
Yeah, so like something you don't even realize is alive, you know, that you're like climbing on.
We've been standing on it the whole time.
Yes. Yeah.
Alien kaiju movie. Yes.
Yes.
So, like Deacon the Mountain versus Godzilla, give that to me.
Put it in my veins.
Yeah. So, how many baby Godzillas could you take, Steven?
None. Okay. Mike. Well established. I'm the guy who dies.
Baby Godzilla, tiny little baby,
like an iguana size.
Yeah, like a plush-sized doll of a Godzilla.
Mike,
Okay, I could take a few of
I've
those.
seen Shin Godzilla. I know how big a baby Godzilla is. I'm
Okay.
still going out like a chump.
Got it. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. But
I
that
know who
gives
I
me
am.
that gives me enough hope that, like, I don't necessarily know if Alvarez will direct the next one. And he said, look, I don't want to do another one in 2 years. Like, let's not rush this. And he pointed to like the 7-year gap between Alien and Aliens, which I think is more of a product of sequels weren't necessarily they weren't necessarily like a given back in the late
Yeah.
70s. And I think you will see more of these, but some time will be given to them. I could see Alvarez like handing off the reins to new writers, a new director, but him, much like in a production role like Scott, overseeing things, giving notes, and having that capacity to like create a bit, but not being the guy in charge, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with more people playing in the sandbox. Like that is fine. And others have said it. Like let all with so many of these women, so many of these movies dealing about body horror and pregnancy and assault. Like maybe let a woman.
Yeah. What about Coralie Farjat?
Exactly.
Ooh, yes, please.
It would be maybe time for a different perspective and take. So,
Definitely.
all
That'd
right.
be cool, especially if we're like working within the offspring world, where there are these like vaginal births that are happening.
Yeah.
And, just I think that I don't think it has to be like, gender essentialist that like only women understand pregnancy, but I do think it would be nice to see that sort of like ability to work with like the deep horror of like the body sort of like betraying itself in pregnancy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I've hit everything I've wanted to hit. Is there anything else before we go?
I feel content with what I have said.
Yeah.
All right.
My big contribution to this, my two big contributions, Fede Alvarez is Horror's J.J. Abrams, and I die first.
You die first.
Also, a kaiju Godzilla versus Deacon.
I kind of fucking love like the idea of a Xenomorph kaiju film. That just, I don't know, that just feels right to me in my soul. I dig that. So
it could work. I think it could work. I think Ridley Scott needs to add that to his plate of like 6 other films.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. You need a Napoleon too.
That feels like because I think the Ridley Scott part of this is like, it's very similar to like a Greek mythology in that, there's aliens coming out of how like all the like children of gods were birthed out of like calves and out of the top of Zeus's head or whatever. Like, yeah, I think that could work really well with a giant, absolutely giant mountain of a Deacon,
like a volcano of aliens. Like instead of lava, it's just
or acid. Yeah, it's all the acid blood.
Yes,
be amazing. I do love, like, speaking of Scott again, like he obviously was really involved and championed this film, and I love like Alvarez. He showed this to both Scott and James Cameron, and like the early word was like, yeah, both of the guys love it. They're really into it. They both have given their approval. And I think Cameron came out like not too long after. He's like, I said it was okay. Like, let's not go over here. Like
a very Jim Cameron response. Yeah,
James Cameron. Like he's like, it's no Avatar 2, but
yeah, right.
But what is, Jim? What is?
Thankfully, many things aren't.
Yeah.
I still have not seen either of those. I have like zero interest.
I don't like the first one, so I have avoided the second one. But I will engage with it at some point, I'm sure.
Oh, life is short. Well, speaking of life is short, let's plug some stuff where listeners can find us. And Kate, tell us about both of your shows, the Buffy Pod, Fangs for the Memories, as well as Tender Subjects.
Yeah. So, Thanks for the Memories is a Buffy rewatch podcast with like a queer leftist bent. We get pretty serious, but we also get extremely silly.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it's a
You
good
do.
balance of the two. Um, and we are at Fangs podcast on all of the socials. We are in the middle of, actually, we're sort of about to end season 6. We have like 3 more episodes of season 6. So it's a tough season. We're
Mm-hmm.
about to get into the worst parts of, not worst, but hardest parts
So
of,
Kara's death, Willow
yeah,
Breaking Bad,
yep, Spike assaulting
mm-hmm.
Buffy. A lot of stuff that's like,
Xander's yellow crayon speech.
yep, there's a lot.
Oh.
There's a lot. We have some really good guests that I'm really excited about that like
Mm-hmm.
all like volunteered to tackle these things with
Mm-hmm.
us. So we're
Oh, okay.
we can't wait.
Great.
Yeah, so if you want to join on a high note of the end of season 6, please do. Or you can listen from the beginning if you're due for a Buffy
Mm-hmm.
rewatch, which everyone is, and it's fall, which is the perfect time to do a
Mm-hmm.
Buffy rewatch. And then our other podcast, my other podcast is Tender Subject, which you can find on Twitter at Tender Subject Pod, and then on Instagram at Tender_Subject. Is a body horror and cannibalism podcast. We do like really, really deep dives. I do a lot of research, and we have a lot of guests who are academics and critics and artists who have, I think, like really interesting, deep, fresh perspectives on the topic at hand. Our next episode is The Substance, like I said, and our guest is Joe Isaacson, who has a book coming out about hagsploitation and like campy old Hollywood movies, and she connects that to The Substance, which is so cool.
Excellent.
Yeah, so like I spend so much time researching for that podcast, so like please listen to it. It's great, I think.
Just added
And
that to the rotation, so I'm
yeah, and then
gonna
if you want
start
to
with your
just,
Texas Chainsaw episode.
which also has Joe Isaacson, which is really
Excellent.
cool. And then if you want to just follow me, I'm Katy Terry on Twitter, and I, like Mike said, I'm probably gonna say something insane and
But it's fun.
and make people really angry, and it's great.
Anyway, Steven,
No argument here.
disenfranchised. What's going on with it?
Well, we just wrapped up our Spooky-thon for 2024, our 5th annual Spooky-thon, and we're heading into November. We just had our mutual friend Devon Taylor on to talk about 2009 Push, and a movie he loves and is probably the world's biggest fan of, which he proves on that episode. I don't know if you knew this, Mike, but November 2024 is the 65th anniversary of Rocky and Bullwinkle.
I did not know that.
So we're gearing up to cover the made-for-TV Boris and Natasha movie and the 2000s Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle with Robert De Niro as fearless leader. Yes.
I refuse to believe that exists.
It's happening, Mike. It is happening. And then we're finishing out the month with our Thanksgiving episode, our annual Thanksgiving episode, where we're going to be joined by one of my high school buddies, Noah East, to talk about Hot Rod. He doesn't know it yet, but we're going to talk about Hot Rod.
That movie is so good. Hot Rod is so good.
So and I've never seen it. So I'm gonna bust my Hot Rod cherry on this one. So yeah,
you are in for an absolute treat. That movie's a riot.
That is what I'm told
so much.
Yeah, but that's what's going on Disenfranchised. Yeah, find us on social media. I've wiped all of my Twitter presence recently. I've completely nuked it to the ground. So find me on Blue Sky. I'm at Chewy Walrus. The podcast is at Disenfranch Pod. And yeah, that's all I got for right now. I've got another podcast I'm working on, but I'm still working on that one. So yeah.
There you go. That whole era for De Niro, was that more like, I know Pacino recently came out and said, I did all these movies because I went broke. Basically, he's like, I lost all my money and went broke. I don't think that was De Niro's thing. I think he was just taking all of that money and funneling it into Tribeca.
was going to say that's his buying up Tribeca period. And so he's like, every one of these I do, I get to buy another loft.
But at what cost, Bobby D? At what cost?
I mean, at the cost of, owning a good sizable chunk of New York City, I suppose.
So listeners, all right, for myself, you can find me at Blueski at Mike Snoonian. Same for Instagram. I deleted my Twitter profile, my personal one, and I think the show one will be going soon because I just have been getting more and more unhinged, and I forget sometimes I'm not the only one associated with this show. So when I call someone like a cousin fucker from Kentucky, I have to realize there's like 5 other people that are, closely associated with the show that even if they agree, may not want that thrown out there. And I'm not a huge social media guy anyway, but you can find both the show and myself over on Blueski, where, occasionally I post stuff. Follow me at Letterboxd at Mike Chump Change, though. The other thing I would direct you to is make sure you're listening to my other show. I think I referenced it briefly, Off the Hook, a Texas Chainsaw Massacre podcast, where Rebecca McCallum of Talking Hitchcock and I watch 74 seconds at a time of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then dissect it for about an hour an episode.
It's so fun. It's such a fun podcast.
Oh my God.
I've been enjoying it a lot so far, Mike.
A lot. I love it because Rebecca is a genius and so much fun to talk to and very intimidating because her brain is massive and amazing. And you should also listen to Talking Hitchcock if you would all appreciate the work of Alfred Hitchcock, because it's just a brilliant show. Probably the only person knows more than anyone else about Hitchcock, unless you're over the age of 70, and she is definitely not that. So Off the Hook, we've posted, by the time this comes out, we're only 3 minutes in to the film. We've recorded about 10 episodes, and we're just dropping them every second and fourth Thursday of the month. So we're going to be doing this for a long time.
The end of time, yeah.
So the end of time we'll be doing. At one point she asked, do you want to make it so we watch longer chunks of the movie? I'm like, no, this is the show you pitched. This is what we're doing. We'll make it work.
Right.
Because this idea is just crazy enough to work. If you want to hear more of us, go to patreon.com/pod and the pendulum. Become a patron for a couple bucks. Right now, Ariel is in the midst of her franchise look back at I Spit on Your Grave, where she has an episode dedicated just to the subgenre of rape revenge and its history, as well as month by month the original film and all its sequels / remakes. Something different, not on our main feed, and Ariel's been doing an amazing job covering that series along with very special guests. Very soon we're going to have Brian doing the Nosferatu films, each of the 3 movies. And Steven, I think he'll reach out to you and say, do you want to come on for that? But yes, that please. Will be patron exclusive as well. I want to start getting into things like next year's 40 years of Back to the Future. Wouldn't fit on the main feed. Let's do it for the patron. Mm-hmm. But we have about 70 plus hours of content on there right now, which you can start to access for as little as $2. Pretty cheap. You get to hear more of us. I mean, who wouldn't want that? If, times are tight and you cannot become a patron at the moment, an easy way to help us, super easy. Wherever you go to listen to your shows, leave us a 5-star review, 5 stars. And then with Apple in particular, a few kind words, why you're listening, what you like about the show, and hit submit. And that helps new listeners find us all the time. Not 4 stars. It's like the 6-minute ab segment from Something About Mary. We don't want a 4-star review because that actually hurts. So 5 stars only. Definitely not a 1-star review. That would, what are we doing here? Fine.
Anything that's not a 5 hurts, logistically, but also it hurts our hearts and our feelings. Yeah. And we don't want to do that.
We got a 1-star review once where it was like, it sounds like in the early days of the show, or it's a 2-star review where like, it sounds like two of my drunk uncles talking about horror. And I'm like, how is that a bad thing? Like
Right.
that sounds, I actually appreciate that
It's
review.
delightful.
That's amazing. Thank you. That I will accept. What's coming up? We have Ghostbusters. That is the next franchise we are jumping into. Thought of this, the little taste. The phrase, I ain't afraid of no ghosts. Well, of course you're not. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, there are no ghosts to be afraid of. It's when there are ghosts around that you're supposed to be afraid, Ray Parker Jr. Your song is incorrect. That is the kind of analysis you can expect coming up.
But the one thing I think we can all agree on, Mike,
Bustin' makes you feel good?
Bustin' makes us feel
It
good.
does. It really does. All right, listeners, thanks so much. We hope you've appreciated this episode of Romulus. Kate, you are welcome back anytime.
Yes.
I will
Thank you.
probably just send you a list of what we're doing and try to like weasel my way into having you on more. It's been an absolute delight. So,
Thank you.
have a great one, listeners. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.